The summer sun hung high over St. Mary's Field, its golden rays spilling across the church picnic like a promise of endless joy. Laughter rang out from children chasing each other through the grass, their bare feet kicking up dandelion fluff. The air smelled of grilled hot dogs and fresh lemonade, and the hum of conversation wove through the crowd. Parishioners, families, and friends, all gathered under the wide Indiana sky. But for Margaret Hensley, standing by the quilted picnic, tables with a paper plate in hand, the warmth of that July day in 2013 would soon turn cold. Her 7-year-old son, Caleb, was nowhere to be seen. Margaret's eyes darted across the field, scanning the clusters of children playing tag, the adults chatting in lawn chairs, the teenagers sneaking off to the edge of the woods with plastic cups. Caleb's bright red jacket, a hand-me-down from his older brother. Daniel should have been easy to spot. He'd been wearing it all morning, despite the heat, because he loved the way it made him feel like a superhero. She'd seen him just 20 minutes ago, darting toward the bounce house with his best friend, Tommy Carver. Now, the bounce house stood eerily still, its bright colors sagging under the weight of the humid afternoon. "Daniel," Margaret called, her voice sharper than she intended. Her 16-year-old son looked up from his spot by the dessert table, where he was sneaking a second slice of Mrs. Carver's pecan pie. "Have you seen Caleb?" Daniel shrugged, his lanky frame slouched in that teenage way that drove Margaret crazy. "He was with Tommy, wasn't he? Probably off climbing trees or something." Margaret's stomach twisted. Caleb wasn't the type to wander off alone. He was cautious, her sensitive boy, always checking in, always staying close. She set her plate down on the table, ignoring the concerned glance from Mrs. Carver, who was slicing watermelon nearby. "Tommy," Margaret called, spotting the boy's mop of blonde hair near the tire swing. He jogged over, his sneakers untied, his face flushed from running. "Where's Caleb?" she asked, her voice steady but tight. Tommy's brow furrowed. "I dunno. He said he was going to get a soda from the cooler, but that was like a while ago." Margaret's heart lurched. She turned, scanning the crowd again, her eyes lingering on the tree line at the edge of the field. The woods beyond were dense, a tangle of oak and maple that stretched toward the old stone church and its sprawling grounds. The picnic was on church property, a sprawling 10 acres that included the field, a small playground, and the ancient rectory, a crumbling building nobody used anymore. She told Caleb 100 times to stay away from those woods. He'd promised he would stay here. She told Tommy, her tone leaving no room for argument. She grabbed Daniel's arm. "Come with me. We're going to find him." Daniel rolled his eyes but followed, sensing the shift in his mother's voice. The crowd parted as Margaret moved with purpose, her sandals slapping against the dry grass. She called Caleb's name, her voice rising with each step, drawing curious glances from the other picnickers. Pastor Gregory, a broad-shouldered man with a gentle smile, approached her. His brow creased with concern. "Double quotes Margaret. Everything all right?" he asked, wiping his hands on a napkin. "Caleb's gone," she said, the words spilling out before she could soften them. "He was here, and now he's not." Pastor Gregory's face tightened. "All right, let's not panic. He's probably just wandered off. We'll organize a search." He raised his voice, calling for attention, and within minutes, the picnic transformed into something else entirely. Neighbors and strangers alike fanned out across the field, calling Caleb's name. The bounce house was deflated, the coolers checked, the playground scoured. Daniel and Tommy ventured toward the woods, shouting for Caleb, while Margaret stayed near the center of the field, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone, debating whether to call the police. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the field. Sheriff Paul Whitaker arrived with 2 deputies, their radios crackling as they coordinated with the volunteers. Margaret gave them a photo of Caleb, his gap-toothed smile, his dark curls, his red jacket. She described his habits, his fears, his favorite places. "He doesn't like the dark," she whispered to Sheriff Whitaker, her voice breaking. "He wouldn't stay out here this long." The search stretched into the night. Flashlights bobbed. Through the woods, their beams cutting through the thick underbrush. Dogs barked in the distance, their handlers urging them forward. Margaret stood at the edge of the field. Her arms wrapped around herself as Daniel returned from the woods. His face pale. "Mom, we didn't find anything," he said, his voice small. Not even his jacket. Margaret's knees buckled and Pastor Gregory caught her before she fell. "We'll find him," he said, his voice steady but hollow. "We'll find him." But they didn't. Not that night, nor the next, nor the weeks that followed. Caleb Hensley, 7 years old, vanished without a trace. The police searched the woods, the rectory, the church, the nearby river. They interviewed every adult at the picnic, combed through alibis, and chased down leads. That led nowhere. The town of Willow Creek rallied around the Hensley family, holding candlelight vigils, plastering missing posters on every telephone pole. But as weeks turned to months, the posters faded, the vigils dwindled, and the town moved on. Margaret didn't. She couldn't. 12 years later, in the spring of 2025, Willow Creek was a different place. The old stone church still stood, but its congregation had shrunk, and the rectory had been condemned, its windows boarded up, its walls crumbling under the weight of time. Margaret Hensley had aged far beyond her 47 years, her dark hair streaked with grey, her eyes carrying a permanent shadow. She lived alone now Daniel had moved to Indianapolis for college and stayed there, unable to bear the weight of his mother's grief. The house was too quiet, filled with memories of Caleb's laughter, his small hand in hers, his red jacket hanging in the closet, untouched. Margaret worked at the local library, a job she'd taken to fill the empty hours. She spent her days shelving books, helping kids with their homework, and avoiding the pitying glances of her co-workers. But she never stopped searching for answers. She scoured online forums, followed true crime blogs, and called Sheriff Whitaker every few months, asking for updates that never came. The case was cold, the file buried in a box somewhere in the sheriff's office. That April, a construction crew arrived to demolish the old rectory. The church had sold the land to a developer planning to build condos, and the rectory was the first to go. Margaret watched from across the street as the crew set up their equipment, her heart heavy with memories of that picnic. She hadn't been back to the church grounds since Caleb disappeared, but something drew her there that day, a pull she couldn't explain. As the crew began tearing down the rectory's outer walls, one of the workers, a young man named Javier, noticed something odd. Behind a section of the basement wall, sealed with fresh concrete, was a small, hollow space. He called over his supervisor, a gruff man named Ed, who pried at the concrete with a crowbar. The wall gave way, revealing a dusty, cramped compartment. Inside, folded neatly, was a child's red jacket. Javier's shout brought the crew to a halt. Ed pulled the jacket out, holding it up to the light. It was faded but intact, its zipper still gleaming faintly. Tucked inside the pocket was a small, crumpled piece of paper, a drawing of a stick figure. Family labeled in a child's scroll: Mom, Dad, Daniel, me. Word spread quickly. By noon, Sheriff Whitaker was on the scene, his face grim as he examined the jacket. Margaret arrived minutes later, her breath catching as she saw the red fabric. In the sheriff's hands, she didn't need to look closely to know it was Caleb's. The Superman patch on the sleeve, the frayed hem from where he'd dragged it through the dirt, she'd recognize it anywhere. "Where did you find it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "In the basement," Ed said, his tone uneasy. "Behind a wall. It was sealed up, like someone hid it there." Margaret's knees gave out, and Javier caught her, guiding her to a nearby bench. "Sheriff." Whitaker knelt beside her, his voice gentle but firm. "Margaret, we're going to figure this out. I promise you, we're reopening the case." The discovery of Caleb's jacket sent ripples through Willow Creek, the town once resigned to. The mystery buzzed with speculation. Online forums lit up with theories. Some said Caleb had been kidnapped. Others whispered about a cover-up. The police cordoned off the rectory, treating it as a crime scene. Forensic teams combed through the debris, searching for DNA, fingerprints, anything that might explain how Caleb's jacket ended up behind the sealed wall. Margaret sat in her living room that night, the jacket laid out on the coffee table. She hadn't touched it since the sheriff let her see it, afraid it would crumble under her fingers. The drawing was beside it, its edges yellowed but the crayon lines still vivid. She traced the stick figures with her eyes, her late husband, Tom, Daniel, and Caleb. Tom had died of a heart attack 2 years after Caleb vanished. The grief too much for his body to bear. Now, it was just her and Daniel and this jacket, a ghost from a life she'd lost. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Daniel, calling from Indianapolis. "Mom, I saw the news. Is it true? They found his jacket." "Yes," she said, her voice hollow. "It's his." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I'm coming home. I'll be there tomorrow." Margaret nodded, though he couldn't see her. "Okay," she whispered. "Be careful." After hanging up, she sat in the dark, her mind racing. The jacket wasn't just a clue, it was a message. Someone had hidden it, sealed it away in a place no one was meant to find. But why? And where was Caleb? The next morning, Daniel arrived, his old pickup truck rattling into the driveway. He looked older than his 28 years, his jaw tight, his eyes shadowed with the same grief that haunted his mother. They sat at the kitchen table, the jacket between them, neither willing to touch it. "I should have watched him closer," Daniel said, his voice low. "That day, I was too busy being a stupid teenager." Margaret reached for his hand, squeezing it. "It wasn't your fault. You were a kid, too." Daniel shook his head. "I keep thinking about what he said to me that morning. He was so excited about the picnic, kept talking about how he and Tommy were going to be explorers. I didn't think anything of it." Margaret's heart skipped. Explorers? Did he say where they were going? Daniel frowned, rubbing his temples. "I don't remember. I think he mentioned the rectory. Said it looked like a castle or something. I told him to stay away from it." Margaret's breath caught. The rectory. She'd always assumed Caleb had wandered into the woods. But what if he'd gone to the rectory instead? It was closer to the picnic, just across the field. The police had searched it, but not thoroughly. Everyone had focused on the woods. She called Sheriff Whitaker, her hands shaking as she relayed Daniel's memory. "We need to look at the rectory again," she said. "Not just the basement, the whole building." Whitaker sighed. "Margaret, we're already combing through it. The forensics team is there now, but I'll make sure they check every inch." "Thank you," she said, though the words felt empty. She hung up and turned to Daniel. "I'm going there." "Mom, you can't. It's a crime scene." "I don't care," she said, grabbing her keys. "That's where he was." "I know it." Daniel hesitated, then followed her. They drove to the church grounds in silence, the weight of 12 years pressing down on them. The rectory loomed ahead, its boarded windows like blind eyes. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze, and a small crowd of onlookers had gathered. Whispering among themselves, Sheriff Whitaker met them at the edge of the tape. "Margaret, you shouldn't be here." "I need to see it," she said, her voice firm. "Please." Whitaker studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but you stay with me." He led them through the rectory's front door, the air inside thick with dust and mildew. The interior was a maze of narrow hallways and small rooms, the walls stained with age. Margaret's eyes darted to every corner, searching for something, anything that might connect to Caleb. The basement stairs creaked under their weight as they descended, the air growing colder. The sealed wall was gone now, reduced to rubble. The forensics team was there, bagging debris, taking photos. Margaret's gaze fell on the spot where the jacket had been found. It was a small, hidden compartment, barely big enough for a child to crawl into. Her stomach churned at the thought of Caleb in that dark, cramped space. "Anything else?" she asked Whitaker, her voice trembling. "Not yet," he said, "but we're testing the jacket for DNA. If there's anything to find, we'll find it." Margaret nodded, but her eyes lingered on the basement walls. Something about the rectory felt wrong, like it was hiding more than just a jacket. She remembered Pastor Gregory's words from that day. "We'll find him." He'd been so certain, so calm. But he'd left Willow Creek a year after Caleb's disappearance, moving to a parish in Ohio. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, with the jacket resurfacing, she wondered. Over the next few days, the investigation gained momentum. The police brought in ground-penetrating radar to scan the rectory's foundation. Searching for more hidden compartments, Margaret and Daniel spent hours at the library, digging through old church records, looking for anything that might explain why Caleb's jacket was sealed in that wall. They found nothing conclusive, but Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that the rectory held the key. Meanwhile, the town was alive with rumors. Some said the rectory was haunted, that Caleb's ghost had led the workers to the jacket. Others whispered about Pastor Gregory, pointing out how quickly he'd left after the disappearance. Margaret tried to ignore the gossip, but it seeped into her thoughts, planting seeds of doubt. One evening, Tommy Carver, now a lanky 19-year-old, showed up at Margaret's door. He'd been away at college but had come home after hearing about the jacket. His face was pale, his hands fidgeting as he sat on her couch. "I've been thinking about that day," he said, his voice low. "Caleb and I, we were playing explorers. We went to the rectory. I didn't tell anyone because I was scared we'd get in trouble." Margaret's heart stopped. "You went inside?" Tommy nodded. "Just for a minute. We were in the basement, poking around. Caleb found this loose board in the wall. He thought it was a secret passage or something. I told him we should go back to the picnic, but he wanted to stay. I left him there, Mrs. Hensley. I left him." Margaret's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What happened after you left?" "I don't know," Tommy said, his eyes filling with tears. "I went back to the picnic. I thought he'd follow me. When I saw he wasn't there, I figured he'd gone home or something. I didn't tell anyone because I was scared." Margaret wanted to scream, to shake him, but she saw the guilt in his eyes. He'd been a child, too. "Did you see anyone else in the rectory?" she asked. Tommy hesitated. I think so. There was someone in the hallway when we went in. I didn't get a good look, but they were tall, wearing dark clothes. I thought it was one of the church volunteers." Margaret exchanged a glance with Daniel. "Did you tell the police this back then?" she asked. Tommy shook his head. "I didn't think it mattered. I was 7. I didn't know what to say." After Tommy left, Margaret called Sheriff Whitaker, relaying the new information. He promised to look into it, but his tone was weary, as if he doubted Tommy's memory after all these years. Margaret, though, felt a spark of hope. Someone had been in the rectory with Caleb. Someone who might know what happened. The next day, Margaret and Daniel returned to the rectory, determined to find more answers. The police were still there, but the crowd of onlookers had grown, including a few familiar faces from the church. Among them was Mrs. Carver, Tommy's mother, who approached Margaret with a nervous smile. "I heard about the jacket," she said, her voice soft. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. If there's anything I can do." Margaret nodded, but her attention was elsewhere. Across the street, a man stood watching the rectory, his hands in his pockets. He was tall, with graying hair and a familiar posture. It took her a moment to place him Pastor Gregory. "What's he doing here?" she whispered to Daniel. Daniel followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "Didn't he move to Ohio?" Margaret didn't answer. She crossed the street, her heart pounding. "Pastor Gregory?" she called. The man turned, his face breaking into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Margaret, it's been a long time." "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I heard about the jacket," he said, his tone measured. "I wanted to see if I could help." Margaret studied him, searching for something in his expression, a flicker of guilt, a hint of fear, but his face was unreadable. "You were there that day," she said. "You helped to organize the search." "I did," he said, nodding. "It was a terrible day. I've never stopped praying for Caleb." Margaret's hands trembled. Did you see him in the rectory? Pastor Gregory's smile faltered just for a moment. The rectory? No. I was in the field all day. You know that. But Margaret wasn't so sure. As she watched him walk away, her mind raced with questions. Why had he come back now, after all these years? And what did he know about the rectory? That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, the drawing from Caleb's jacket in front of her. The stick figures stared back, their crayon smiles mocking her. She thought of Tommy's story, of the tall figure in the hallway, of Pastor Gregory's sudden return. The pieces were there, but they didn't fit together, not yet. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was Sheriff Whitaker. Margaret, we got the DNA results from the jacket. There's something you need to know. What is it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. There's blood on the jacket, he said. It's Caleb's, but there's something else, another DNA profile. We don't have a match yet, but it's not from you or Daniel or Tom. Margaret's heart pounded. Whose is it? We don't know, Whitaker said, but we're running it through every database we have. And Margaret, there's one more thing. The concrete in that wall, it was poured after the picnic. Someone sealed the jacket in there deliberately. Margaret's vision blurred, the room spinning. Someone had taken her son, hidden his jacket and sealed it away. And now, 12 years later, the truth was starting to surface. But where was Caleb? And who was hiding in the shadows of that rectory, watching her son disappear? Margaret Hensley sat in the dim glow of her kitchen, the clock ticking past midnight. The drawing from Caleb's jacket lay before her, its crayon lines a fragile thread to the son she'd lost 12 years ago. Sheriff Whitaker's words echoed in her mind. Caleb's blood on the jacket, another DNA profile, the concrete poured after the picnic. Someone had hidden the truth, buried it behind a basement wall in the old rectory. But who? And why now, after all these years, was the past clawing its way back? Daniel slept on the couch, his long frame curled under a blanket, unwilling to leave. His mother alone. Margaret envied his ability to rest, even briefly. Her own mind was a storm of questions, each one circling back to Pastor Gregory's sudden return to Willow Creek. His calm demeanor at the rectory, his too smooth answers they gnawed at her. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through old emails, searching for anything about Gregory's departure in 2014. Nothing stood out, but a memory surfaced. His insistence during the search that Caleb had likely wandered into the woods, steering. Attention away from the rectory. By morning, Margaret was at the sheriff's office, her eyes bloodshot but resolute. Sheriff Whitaker looked weary, his desk cluttered with files from the reopened case. We're running the second DNA profile through national databases, he said, rubbing his temples. But it could take days, maybe weeks, to get a hit. What about Pastor Gregory? Margaret asked. He was here yesterday, watching the rectory. Why come back now? Whitaker frowned. Gregory, he's in Ohio, last I heard. You sure it was him? It was him, she said firmly. He said he wanted to help, but he was nervous. I could see it. Whitaker leaned back, considering. All right, I'll have a deputy check his whereabouts in 2013, see if there's anything we missed. But Margaret, don't go confronting him yourself. Let us handle it. Margaret nodded, but her resolve hardened. She wasn't waiting for the police to catch up. Back home, she called Daniel into the kitchen. We need to talk to Tommy again, she said. He saw someone in the rectory that day. We need details. Daniel hesitated. Mom, Tommy's a wreck. He feels guilty enough, I know, she said softly. But he's our only witness. They drove to the Carver house where Tommy's mother, Ellen, greeted them with a strained smile. Tommy sat in the living room, his hands twisting in his lap. I told you everything, he said, avoiding Margaret's gaze. I don't remember anything else. Try, Tommy, Margaret urged. The person in the hallway, what did they look like? Anything at all? Tommy closed his eyes, his brow furrowing. It was dark in there. I just saw a shadow, I guess, tall, like I said. They had a coat, maybe, or a robe. I don't know. Caleb was so excited about that loose board. I didn't pay attention. Margaret's heart skipped. A robe. Pastor Gregory always wore a long black cassock during church events. Was it someone from the church? She pressed. Tommy shrugged helplessly. Maybe. I'm sorry. Mrs. Hensley. Ellen placed a hand on her son's shoulder. He's been having nightmares since you called, she said quietly. He was just a kid back then. I know, Margaret said, her voice tight. Thank you, Tommy. Outside. Daniel kicked at the gravel driveway. What now? We're chasing ghosts. Not ghosts, Margaret said. Someone real. Someone who was in that rectory with Caleb. That afternoon, Margaret and Daniel returned to the library. Combing through old church newsletters and town records, they found a photo from the 2013 picnic. Pastor Gregory standing by the bounce house, his cassock billowing in the breeze. A faint smile on his face. Margaret's stomach churned. He'd been so close to where Caleb was last seen. A librarian, Mrs. Hargrove, noticed their intensity. Looking for something specific, she asked. Adjusting her glasses, Margaret hesitated, then showed her the photo. Do you remember Pastor Gregory? Anything unusual about him back then? Mrs. Hargrove's lips pursed. He was a good pastor, but secretive, I suppose. Kept to himself. I always thought it was odd how quickly he left after your. Boy, she trailed off, her face softening. I'm sorry, dear. Did he ever talk about the rectory? Daniel asked. Mrs. Hargrove frowned. Not that I recall, but he was always fussing about the church grounds, saying they needed repairs. The rectory was falling apart even then. Margaret exchanged a glance with Daniel. Repairs. Could Gregory have been involved in sealing the wall? She thanked Mrs. Hargrove and pulled Daniel aside. We need to find out where Gregory is staying. Mom, this is crazy, Daniel said. You're accusing a pastor of what? Kidnapping? Worse? I don't know, she admitted. But he's hiding something. They drove to the church, where a secretary confirmed Pastor Gregory was visiting for a few days, staying at a motel on the edge of town. Margaret's pulse quickened. She wanted to confront him, but Daniel convinced her to wait. Let's tell Whitaker first, he said. If Gregory is involved, we need proof. Reluctantly, Margaret agreed. They called Whitaker, who promised to send a deputy to question Gregory. But as they left the church, Margaret noticed a familiar figure across the street. Ellen Carver watching them from her car. Their eyes met, and Ellen quickly drove away. Why is she following us? Daniel muttered. Margaret's unease grew. Ellen had been at the picnic, helping with the food. She'd been close to the rectory, too. And Tommy's guilt, could it be more than a child's regret? She pushed the thought away, but it lingered. That night, a storm rolled into Willow Creek, thunder rattling the windows of Margaret's house. She couldn't sleep, her mind replaying Tommy's words, Gregory's smile, Ellen's nervous glance. Around 2 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the rectory. I know what happened to Caleb. Margaret's heart stopped. She stared at the message, her hands trembling. It could be a trap, but it was the first real lead in 12 years. She woke Daniel, showing him the text. I'm going, she said. Are you insane? He hissed. Call Whitaker? There's no time, she said, grabbing her coat. You can stay here, but I'm going. Daniel groaned but followed, pulling on his boots. They drove through the rain, the rectory's silhouette looming against the lightning streaked sky. The police tape was torn, fluttering in the wind. Margaret clutched a flashlight, her heart pounding as they approached the basement entrance. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, the smell of mildew overwhelming. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing the rubble of the demolished wall. Margaret called out, Hello? Anyone here? A shadow moved at the far end of the basement. Margaret froze, her beam landing on Ellen Carver. She stood by a rusted metal cabinet, her face pale, her hands shaking. Ellen? Margaret whispered. You sent the text. Ellen nodded, her eyes darting to Daniel. I couldn't keep it in any more. I saw something that day. Margaret stepped closer, her voice steady despite her fear. "What did you see, Ellen's?" Breath hitched. It was Gregory. He was in the rectory in the basement. I went to get more napkins from storage and I saw him. With Caleb. Margaret's blood ran cold. What was he doing? He was talking to him, holding his arm. Caleb looked scared. I didn't think much of it at first. I thought Gregory was just scolding him for wandering off. But then I saw him pull Caleb toward that wall. She pointed to the spot where the jacket was found. I left. I didn't say anything because I was afraid. Margaret's vision blurred with tears and rage. "You saw my son being taken, and you said nothing." "I'm sorry," Ellen sobbed. "I didn't know what to do. Gregory was the pastor. I thought I was wrong, that I'd imagined it." Daniel stepped forward, his voice low. "Why now, Ellen? Why wait 12 years? Because of the jacket," she said. "When I heard it was found, I knew it was real. I couldn't live with it anymore." Margaret's hands clenched. "Where's Gregory now?" "I don't know," Ellen said. "But he's been calling me, asking what I've told the police. He's scared." Before Margaret could respond, a creak echoed from the stairs. All three turned, their flashlights sweeping the darkness. Pastor Gregory stood there, his cassock soaked from the rain, his face unreadable. "Margaret," he said, his voice calm, "you shouldn't be here." Daniel stepped in front of his mother, his fists clenched. "What did you do to my brother?" Gregory raised his hands, his eyes flicking to Ellen. "I didn't do anything." Ellen's confused. She's always been unstable. "Liar," Ellen hissed. "I saw you with Caleb." Gregory's composure cracked, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "You don't know what you saw. I was protecting him. He was lost. Scared enough," Margaret snapped. She pulled out her phone, dialing Whitaker. "You're not leaving until the police get here." Gregory lunged, knocking the phone from her hand. Daniel tackled him, pinning him to the ground. Ellen screamed, backing against the wall. Margaret scrambled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she redialed. "Paul, it's Margaret. We're at the rectory. Gregory's here. Hurry." Minutes later, sirens pierced the storm. Deputies stormed the basement, cuffing Gregory as he shouted about his innocence. Margaret watched, her heart a tangle of relief and pain. They had him. But where was Caleb? The next morning, Gregory was interrogated at the sheriff's office. Margaret and Daniel sat in Whitaker's office, listening through a speaker. Gregory denied everything at first, claiming he'd only been trying to help Caleb find his way back to the picnic. But under pressure, his story unraveled. Caleb was in the rectory, he admitted, his voice low. He'd wandered in, playing some game. "I found him in the basement, near that loose board. He fell, hit his head. There was blood. I panicked." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Daniel gripped her shoulder, his face pale. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Gregory continued. "I hid his jacket, sealed, the wall. I thought it would be better if everyone thought he'd run away." "Where is he?" Whitaker demanded. "What did you do with his body?" Gregory's voice broke. "I don't know. I left him there in the basement. When I came back, he was gone." Margaret's world tilted. Gone. Caleb had been injured, bleeding, and Gregory had left him. She staggered to her feet, Daniel catching her. "He's lying," she whispered. "He has to be." Whitaker emerged, his face grim. "We're searching the rectory again, top to bottom. If Caleb's there, we'll find him." But Margaret knew it wasn't that simple. If Caleb's body had been in the rectory, why hadn't it been found in 2013? And if he wasn't there, where was he? Days passed, the rectory yielding no new clues. The second DNA profile on the jacket came back unidentified, no match in any database. Gregory was charged with evidence tampering and obstruction, but without Caleb's body. Murder charges were uncertain. Ellen faced no charges, her testimony crucial to Gregory's arrest. But her guilt drove a wedge between her and Margaret. Margaret and Daniel returned to the rectory one last time. Standing in the basement where Caleb's jacket was found, the air was still. The rubble cleared away. Margaret knelt by the wall, her fingers tracing the cold concrete. "I don't believe he's dead," she said, her voice steady. "I'd feel it if he was." Daniel crouched beside her, his eyes red. "Mom, it's been 12 years. The blood, the jacket. What else is there?" "Hope," she said. "Whoever's DNA was on that jacket, they were with Caleb. They know what happened." Daniel didn't argue. He helped her to her feet, and they left the rectory, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Back home, Margaret placed Caleb's jacket in a box alongside his drawing. She wouldn't stop searching, not until she had answers. Months later, a letter arrived, postmarked from Ohio. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in a shaky hand. "I'm sorry. I was there. I saw him fall. I took him to a hospital, but I was afraid to stay. He lived. Find him in Chicago. No signature, no return address." Margaret's hands shook as she read it again and again. Was it a cruel hoax, or was Caleb alive, out there, waiting to be found? She called Daniel, her voice trembling with hope. "We're going to Chicago," she said. "We're bringing him home." As they packed, Margaret glanced at Caleb's drawing, the stick figure family smiling back. For the first time in 12 years, she felt a spark of light in the darkness. The truth was out there, and she would find it no matter how long it took.